Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this Friday. As COVID restrictions in Melbourne continue to ease. I don't know about you, but wearing a mask outside is awful. I'm Deb Sabaris. I'm the CEO for the Centre for Excellence in Child and Family Welfare. We're the peak body for organisations that work with children, young people, families and carers across Victoria. So welcome with us today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the land on which we're meeting. I'm meeting on Wurundjeri land of the Kulin Nation. I'd like to acknowledge elders past and present, elders and young people from other cultures, and acknowledge that this is and always will be Aboriginal land. And let us know where you're from in the chat. Let us know what lands you're on. Let us know what your backgrounds are. Please share. It's nice to hear. It's nice to hear a bit about you, those that are on this call. I'm going to make some opening remarks and then I'm going to throw to Danielle. So first of all, welcome to our event today. We have representatives, friends, colleagues from across our sector. But I will remind you about housekeeping. They've put this slide up. Georgette, Danielle, well done, because it really is important to make sure that you are familiar with all of this technology, which I suspect you are by now. So this event will go for at least 2 hours, maybe less, depending on what we get through. If you have questions, pop them in the chat and or the Q&A. We'll do our very best. I know Danielle will do her best to try and get those questions answered. If we don't, I'm sure that Danielle will take those away and we'll try and get back to you after this session. So thanks for that. I'll now keep on going with my introductory notes. So thanks for coming along today. The planning of this event has been pretty much entirely done by Danielle Farah with some support from Georgette. And we know this is a youth-led event. And ahead of this, I want to congratulate Danielle, who's very excited. She said that before we started about today's event. She's highly skilled at running these types of groups and events. So I expect you're in for a fantastic couple of hours. The Centre has a strong commitment to youth participation. For several years now, we've engaged with young care leavers who provided leadership in advocacy, policy events and funding proposals for youth-led opportunities and influenced the way we all think and work at the Centre. We're delighted to have 3 young people on our staff through the Working for Victoria Fund, and they have helped us design and deliver events and programs that reflect young people's priorities and concerns. And frankly, it hasn't been a better time to have that type of influence, given that COVID has really disproportionately impacted on young people across this country. We also have a very strong and deep commitment to supporting our culturally and linguistically diverse communities in accessing services. We work closely with our agencies, including many of you here today, who see firsthand the challenges CALD families face in accessing services. Our multicultural working group helps us with identifying not only the service gaps, but the good practice that is happening in supporting better access and outcomes for CALD families. Today's event focuses on the experiences of young people. Danielle Farah, who is one of our youth support facilitators, identified the need for discussion of CALD young people's experiences in accessing services. As I said, Danielle has organised today's expert panel. So again, thank you, Danielle. Danielle will be leading the session today and will be joined by these panel speakers, Mohamed Semra, Julia Koshkulia and Martha Metuisela from CMY, who are here to share their experiences of our service system as culturally and linguistically diverse young people. At this point, I would like to acknowledge the leadership of Carmel Gira and her team at the Centre for Multicultural Youth in promoting and advocating for cultural safety for children and young people in our organisations and in the way we deliver services to children and their families from diverse backgrounds. So I'm looking forward to hearing from our speakers and I'm sure you're in for a treat. The word cultural safety is bandied around a lot, but it actually means something incredibly significant. And it's a really, from our perspective, and I'm sure from those of you who are here today, you know only too well that it's a critical element of being a child-safe organisation and crucial in running programs that meet the needs of the diversity of children and young people living in our community. This can be as simple as making sure that the environment is welcoming and inviting to all, that people from different religious practices are accommodated, that events are inclusive, right down to catering arrangements. These sound simple, but more often they don't happen. But it goes deeper than that. We need to demonstrate an understanding of the importance of family, of traditions, of language, of religious belief when we are designing and delivering services to children, young people and their families. For CALD young people born in Australia, there may be feelings of being torn between different cultures, which can exacerbate anxieties, conflicting attitudes and expectations. However, we know that young people from poor backgrounds demonstrate considerable strength, resilience and resourcefulness. And from a centre's perspective, we know that the solutions to many of the really big problems we face in our communities, that young people can help us very much steer through those. We also know that some of the protective factors that help resilience along include working and supporting cultural identity and also hopefulness. We must work together and explore the ways in which we can ensure CALD young people feel engaged, supported and understood. This is vital, especially for newly arrived young people, where the settlement process or migration journey can impact largely on their knowledge and awareness of available support. We are fortunate today to have Mohamed, Julia and Martha, who can shine a light on what it means to be a CALD young person, but also on how we can work together to make sure the voices of our CALD community are being heard in a meaningful way. Whether you have many years of experience in working with young people from a CALD background, or whether this is a new area for you, we hope you are inspired, and I know you will be, by what you hear today from our three presenters. Now that's enough from me. I want to say thank you so much ahead of the session today, and I really hope that you enjoy it. We're up to, I said, oh, there's no way we'll get 100 people. We're already up to 71 participants. So I think Danny and the panel knew something, that this would be something that people were really needing and wanting to hear about. So over to you, Danny.
Thanks so much, Deb, for the constant support and encouragement to be able to run this session today. It's something that's close to my heart, and I'm sure the 71 others that are here today can agree on that. Now, I just want to begin by sharing that today CALD will be referred to as young people who identify differently to the Anglo-Australian norm. So that could range from birthplace, ancestry, religion, race, ethnicity, or language. Some other terms might be thrown around in today's session, such as multicultural, migrant, or also from a non-English speaking background as well. So I just want to begin by introducing. So I'll just grab the next slide if I can, please. Awesome. So Victoria is the most culturally diverse state in Australia, and more than a quarter of Victorians are born overseas in over 200 countries. But despite the diversity of the Victorian community, racism is an everyday reality for a lot of young people of migrant and refugee backgrounds. Now, against this backdrop, there's been a lot of debate about our cultural diversity in recent years, and it's become increasingly politicised and conflicted nationally. The research on racism and youth wellbeing in Australia remains quite limited. However, young people still experience racism in a significant way through a range of contexts. Racial profiling has quite a negative impact on the settlement and transition of young migrants and refugees, affecting things like self-esteem, self-confidence, belonging to the broader community in general. Racism also threatens personal and cultural identity, and it can be linked to anxiety, depression, low self-esteem, and anger as well. Racism or racial profiling negatively affects young people's health in general. Both Indigenous and young people of migrant and refugee backgrounds can experience the negative effects of racism through inequitable access to resources, higher exposure to risk factors, mental health concerns, and general disengagement from healthy activities. I would now like to introduce Mohamed, who is a social entrepreneur and award-winning advocate working to shatter the stigma and misconceptions surrounding African migrants and refugees. As someone who migrated to Australia at a young age, he has overcome many challenges, such as learning English and overcoming a severe stutter. Mohamed has spent the last 3 years working in community, working with different organisations to tackle racism in schools, founding a social enterprise, and even running for office. Quite the achievement. He hopes that sharing his story and the resilience he has gained from it will inspire young people to become leaders and challenge the negative stereotypes they often face. I would now like to invite Mohamed to reflect on his experiences with racial profiling and what that means for accesses to services within our sector.
Thank you very much, Danielle, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you again for organizing this event and for inviting me as a panel speaker. I guess I would like to begin by saying that growing up, I always had a strong sense of justice, right? I could identify instances of racism and see it for what it was. At a young age, I understood and I accepted that the color of my skin and where I come from ultimately meant that people would often have preconceived ideas about my behavior and my intentions. And I can promise you, like, the same sentiment was found within the majority of colored people that I grew up with. And the truth is, as a young African male and a migrant, I'm facing a society which regards me as aggressive, violent, and uneducated. So a question I always ask myself is, why even try? Like, why should I strive in a society that is essentially built to see me fail? I remember starting my primary education, right, primary school, and it was the most amazing thing. I had the same education as the kid across the road that had a bigger house than me. That his dad drove a nice BMW, and I played with kids of different color. And I guess I saw that we were all equal, and maybe if I wanted to, I could potentially lead this country. However, being a kid, I could not see, I guess, things as they were, or I guess beyond like the veil of my dream and onto the reality, because we might have lived in the same area, we might have gone to the same school. But as the years went by, I began to realize how different we actually were. Because faced with the various predicaments of growing up, I came to realize that I was being treated and seen differently than my peers of Australian descent. People I met for the first time seemed to already like know how I might behave or have these ideas and about like how I would act. And I never really took note of this until I was old enough to understand who I was as a person. And that was an African Australian in a country where, as a migrant and refugee, people in my community had no power and were in charge of no institutions. Just to be in the position I am today, I feel like I had to break a lot of walls and start many precedents. So today I'll be speaking about, I guess, 3 main areas where I feel like were the hardest for me to like find success, right? And 1 was education, 2, employment, and 3 was in like medical sectors, so whether it be in hospitals or later on, I'll be speaking about the tower lockdowns and my experience with that. But for now, I'll touch on a bit of my primary school and high school experiences. So when I was in primary school, I wasn't good at many things, right? But one thing I took pride in was my reading. And as young as year 2, our school used to, I guess, put us in levels of reading ability. So they put the lowest level, intermediate, and highest level, depending on your capability, right? And every year I found that I was always at the lowest level, and I have to work and I have to try and strive to achieve the highest level. And once I did, the following year, my teacher wouldn't even look at my previous report to know what reading level that I'm on. There'll be a presumption that I couldn't read, right? And it happened every year. There was always just a preconceived idea that I couldn't read. And it does get to you. And I was, I guess, like 8 years old, and I was able to realize it for what it was, right? And another thing that I got a lot in, especially, I guess, in primary school and high school, was that every time I handed in the essay, I would get one of two reactions. The first one would be, Mohamed, are you sure this is your work? Are you sure you didn't copy? And the other one was, wow, Mohamed, this is amazing. And I took offense at both of them, really, because one was saying that I didn't have the capabilities to do writing, to that level. And the second one, I would get like, I felt like it was an over exaggeration, because I would get like so much praise, but I would get a mediocre result. So I would get like, like a C, but there'll be other kids in the class again, like a B or A, and I would get like more praise than them. So just to give you guys more of an idea about my experiences. I remember there were many instances where I would start the new year and I would get sent to ESL, right? And for you guys to know what ESL is, it's like English as a second language. So it's the alternative to English. And I remember my first time getting sent there, right? I got sent. I was in there for 5 minutes until the ESL teacher found out that, oh, you can read, he can write, his English levels were all right. So then I got sent back, and it just like kept happening. Those type of, I guess, like implicit biases were always there. And something else that really got to me in education was the remarks and that teachers used, because I feel like it's always important for teachers to know the weight of their words and to know the power they have in their classrooms. And obviously what they say might have an impact on the student. So for instance, there were times where I would come into class and the teacher would say to me, where's the rest of your gang? And she was referring to my African mates. And around that time, there was the whole African gang narrative that was being pushed. And like, yeah, so those type of remarks, I guess I found very offensive. So I guess those were the type of implicit biases that I saw in school. And it was all about, I guess, this preconceived idea that as an African or as a migrant or as a refugee, that I wasn't capable enough. And so I couldn't produce things of high quality and whatnot. Then there came, I guess, when I really started to realize how hard it was to succeed in school is when I started to, when I wanted to actually take on leadership positions, right? Because up until year 10, I had a very severe stutter. And that's why I enjoyed reading, because reading was the only time where I could actually like finish something without my stutter coming out. And it was very bad. My head used to rock, my tongue used to come out, and yeah, I used to present to the teacher in private and all of that. But I remember in year 10, I found a speech therapist course in the trade where I went to for 2 weeks, and I learned how to speak from the very beginning. So after that, I had like an epiphany. I was like, okay, I have a second chance now to go and I guess like do all the things I wanted to do. So I wanted to go to the leadership team. And I remember I approached the leadership teacher and she was like to me, are you sure this is what you want? I'm like, what do you mean? She was like, you can't fight, you have to be good, and all those. And so this particular teacher had like no interaction with me, right? Like she doesn't know that I'm doing well in school. She doesn't know like how I am. So there was a presumption that, just because I'm black, I fight, just because I'm black, I can't, I can't be good. So I went anyway. I went to the first meeting for our leadership team and I put down my name. So you have to put down your name so you can get a leadership badge that will be called out in assembly. And my name was on top of the list. So come assembly time, everyone else's name gets called out except mine. I think that was the school's way of hinting to me to, you might be not, maybe you're not ready yet. And I guess for me, it was easy just to give up, right? It was like, okay, it's clear that that they don't want to see someone like me in that position, so might as well just give up. But I didn't, because I actually realized that there was a problem in my school, that that we were being treated differently than others. So I went anyway. I went back, and when I went to the same teacher, they were really surprised that I was actually serious. Yeah. So I ended up applying, we went on a camp, and then I became school captain. And when I became school captain, just seeing the impact that had on my school, from then on, we went from having no Africans to having 25 in the leadership team. And in the same way, when I went for debating, there was never a person from colored background that was in debating, right? And I saw that as a problem. So I joined debating, and 6 months later, the whole debating team was now African. And for the first time in our high school history, we went undefeated, all of U12. So that was awesome. I think the problem when it comes to education is that teachers might not know how to address racism, right? Because looking back in it, now I'm more mature, now I can articulate what I want to say. So I feel like there wasn't enough training for teachers on cultural awareness. Because I feel like if the teachers truly understood where I came from or understood the weight of their words, then most of the, I guess, implicit biases that they might have not, I guess, impacting me the way they did. Because I did see a lot of my friends do give up. Because I was lucky that I had that support system, whether it be from family or from youth workers and so on, just to keep me on track. But a lot of my friends, I guess, left school, left education because they felt like the school did not have their best interests at heart. So on another note, I guess where I found a lot of barriers outside of school was when it came to employment. I remember my first time I was trying to find a job, right? I kept applying, and like my resume, like I worked so hard in the year, but everywhere I went, I wasn't getting a call back. And so I started thinking, is it like, do I have to like put more things on my resume, or is it my name? Should I change my name? So I decided to change my name on my resume. And I don't know if it was a coincidence, but the moment I did change my name, I did get a call back. So I started working. So there was already a barrier just to enter the workforce, right? And while I was in work, there was a lot of things, I guess, that I experienced at work that just showed me, okay, like how broad racism is. I remember one day I was working and the owner came in, and the owner hardly comes in, right? And so the owner went to go speak to the team leader, and the team leader told me the conversation afterwards. But what the owner told the team leader is that there was the money at the end of the day was not adding up, and he asked the team leader whether I was stealing. So he asked him, "How's Mohamed? Has he been stealing from the till?" And the team leader like told me, because like we were very close, and I was just like shocked. For me, I guess it was an eye opener, because okay, I already experienced it at school. Now my first job, I'm experiencing this. Then it just showed me that okay, there's a lot of things that I guess need to be brought to the forefront of political discussions. Another instance, I guess, like of racism that I've had, I don't know if you guys know about the Apple incident that happened in 2015, when me and a group of my mates wanted to go to an Apple store, and then we were denied entry. And lucky we decided to record it. We got it on camera, and the manager said that they're not going to let us in because they feel like we might steal something. And I guess that for me just kept adding on to like the experiences that we feel, but we were just lucky enough to get it on camera. Because I would have been like 15, 16 years old, right? And I'm getting told by one of the biggest companies in the world that they don't want me in their store because as a Black person, I might steal, And yeah, it's very disheartening when you walk into a store, you get followed, and you see everyone else might get followed, only you. It's very easy to make the connection that it is because you're different. So we spoke about education, talked about employment. I think it's very important to also speak about the medical sector, right? And so I volunteered at the public housing towers while they were undergoing hard lockdown. And I got to see firsthand that when it comes to the decisions that really affect us, we're not consulted with. I saw DHHS, and I saw all those organizations on the ground and government. I guess we're deciding people's lives, without even consulting them. And that for me was very, 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 very disheartening, because I saw young people, and a lot of the work was put on our shoulders. We were the ones that were translating material. We were the ones that were going, making sure that people in the towers understood what was happening in their own languages. We were making sure that who didn't have what when they needed it. And when I was at AMSA Youth Center, a majority of the people were under 21. And we were doing a lot more than what a government organization should have been doing, but it all came down to, I guess, understanding the community, because we understand the community. I know almost the majority of people that are in Alfred, right? I can just pick up a phone and just call any one of them and be like, hey, you have this. But because we were not approached early on, and because they felt like they knew what's best for us, those things weren't put in place. So I feel like it's very important to work with community, and it's very important to understand that we know what's good for us. And for instance, right, with the whole COVID situation and the vaccine rollout, I feel like a lot of people from cult background, I'm speaking for my community in particular, we're more storytellers, right? We like telling stories. I think we understand more in that sense. So I feel like more videos need to be made, or people in the community speaking about this, because I feel like the misinformation right now is very rich. So I guess through my own experiences, I've come to understand that at the heart of prejudice is ignorance and fear. All of us make assumptions, and that's a product of human nature. We prejudge without knowing, and we form these ideas, I guess, through this unwillingness to understand one another. Yeah, and I feel like by being culturally aware and reaching out to minorities, we can eradicate this ignorance with love and respect. By understanding a person who is different to us, we can come to terms with our pride and open a gateway to unity. But it's sometimes hard overcoming these assumptions, right? And that's why training is very important. Because intertwining ignorance, right, is fear. Because at the heart of prejudice, I feel like there's privilege and power. This is because racial prejudice is the unwillingness to change one's attitude even after evidence to the contrary. So that one will continue to judge people due to a fear of losing that power and that privilege. That's why I always advocate for people of cult backgrounds to, I guess, not to self-reject. And I feel like that was something I was doing in my younger years. And now I always want to, I guess, if there's a precedent that needs to be started, because it's always hard to be the first in something, because you don't know the reception you're going to get. And that's why it was very important for me to run for council and run for office, because I wanted to show these my community and those young people that it's okay to get outside your comfort zone. It's okay to try and make change, because you might not achieve it, but then again, you'll have a rippling effect on other people's lives. So I guess it is in human nature to categorize and prejudge, but at the end, we need to make a choice to move beyond this. It is only with love, respect, and kindness can the cycle of discrimination finally end. I feel like I might have extended my time a bit. Sorry about that, but yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. Thank you so much, Mohamed, for sharing your experiences with us. And I'm sure that many other young people from refugee and migrant backgrounds do face these challenges as well when they settle in Australia. So thank you for sharing with us. Yeah, challenges such as disrupted schooling and years of displacement, even before young people's arrival to Australia, is something that we really should be considering. And it's vital that we ensure that young people feel supported, connected, and listened to, especially when they come to use our services. I noticed there are a few questions popped in the Q&A. We'll leave that to the end so that our panelists can answer those. We also need to ensure that a lot of cultural awareness training is undertaken within our respective workplaces. This is going to just increase the support we give our young people. We need to make sure that the inclusion of diverse language options and presentations are present in our products and our promotions, and that the information also caters to our cold young people. This is just the first steps of what I think we need to see happening. Now, through this next discussion with Julia, we'll explore why we need to encourage our sector to further consider and create support. So I'll just begin by introducing Julia. She's a Filipino young woman who came to Australia in 2015. Her experience as a young migrant has fueled her passion for youth empowerment. Her current role as a youth worker allows and inspires her to support other young people and amplify their voices. Julia also runs the biannual Universal Access Disco Party for students in Brimbank, including students with a disability. As a young person herself, Julia is passionate about youth empowerment and youth voice, believing that young people deserve to be heard. Julia has also joined the Moorabbin and Moonee Valley Local Learning and Employment Network mentor program as a mentee, and now also runs mentorship trainings. So I would like to invite Julia to reflect on what it means to be a CALD young person and how we can ensure access to these services.
Thank you, Danielle, and hi, everyone. First, before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm zooming in from Wurundjeri land today. And yeah, my name is Julia. I am a 21-year-old Filipino person based in the western suburbs of Melbourne. Today, I'm going to talk about my experiences in accessing services as a newly arrived migrant. So like Danielle mentioned, I first came to Australia in 2015 when I was 15 years old. And I came with my family, so my mom and my dad and my two younger siblings. And when we first came here, we were on a temporary visa. And looking back at my first few years in Australia, kind of like leaves me with mixed feelings. I remember being excited that we finally made it to this country after years of trying to get in. We spent like 7 years applying and randomly heard back from them like one day, and they were just like, you need to like come here in like 2 months. So we had to kind of like pack up and leave quite quickly. And I remember, being excited that we made it to this country. But at the same time, I was quite stressed and anxious about, I guess, my place and my status. So as a temporary migrant, and yeah, I didn't quite anticipate the struggles we would come across as newly arrived people in the country. Both my parents struggled to find employment, especially my dad, who had just been treated for cancer before we left the Philippines. So we were quite poor and believed that as temporary residents, we weren't eligible for any support from the government or from really anywhere in general. We didn't know where to go or who to go to or what sort of support even existed for people like us. We tried to go to Centrelink, but they turned us away because of our visa status. So we thought that our only option was to find work as soon as possible. And as like the oldest child and the oldest daughter in my family, it was kind of like my role to be a third parent and to kind of take on that responsibility with my parents. So as soon as I was able to, I was applying for jobs. And similar to Mohamed, I did experience, it was quite hard for me to apply for jobs. So all my friends were getting jobs, but it was because of my visa status, people assumed that I had like a very weird visa. So people were like, oh, who is this person? We'd rather hire someone else. But yeah, I did eventually find a job because my dad had a friend or made a friend like with someone at Macca's, and he was able to like give me a job. But yeah, my parents did eventually find work, but they struggled to find something that was stable and secure. My mom would work at a place for 3 months and then would have to be let go, and she'd have to find something else. She, ended up applying for jobs that would take her over an hour to commute to, just so she could put food on the table. So during this time in my life, my parents were very focused on just surviving. They didn't really have time, I guess, to check in with me and my siblings and, to like see how we were doing, which, that kind of makes sense. At one point, like I mentioned, my parents struggled a lot to find work. And at one point, I was the only person in my family who had a job when I was 16. And being 16 and feeling that sense of responsibility at such a young age, like being the main source of income for an entire family, even if it was only for a couple of months, was incredibly stressful for me. And I was too embarrassed to tell anyone and just had to deal with it myself. And yeah, our understanding was we couldn't get any financial help from anywhere, so we kind of just had to bear it. My school was somewhat aware of our circumstances, and they did try to support me. I couldn't afford my school uniform, so they were able to arrange for me to get it for free. And my school principal also encouraged me to apply for scholarships, one of which was Western Chances, who were incredibly helpful. And I was able to do things like pay for my school laptop and get a Mikey pass and that sort of thing because of them. So I'm really grateful for their support. And one of the other things that my school, I guess, supported me in doing was volunteering for my school canteen, which I guess doesn't sound like a huge thing, but for me, it was quite good to feel like I was contributing to the school community, because being on a temporary visa makes you feel like you aren't really part of the community, and that you're really just kind of a burden to Australian society. So I guess I was quite anxious to do my part and feel like I was, helpful. And in our second year in Australia, at the beginning of the year, we found out that my dad's cancer came back. I honestly don't remember much about this part of my life because it is still quite painful to think and talk about, but essentially it meant that he couldn't work and it was just myself and my mom working to support the family. We were told that he wasn't going to make it to the end of the year, which was, obviously devastating news for us. I started to struggle a lot with school. So when I first came to Australia, I was quite determined to be a good student. But with all these things kind of going on in my life, I kind of began to feel less motivated. What was the point of trying if, all these barriers are going to keep popping up for me and stopping me from, achieving, I guess, my full potential. So, yeah, eventually, at the end of the year, my dad passed away a few days before Christmas. And I started year 12 just a month later. I remember actually on the first day we had to do this activity about planning for our future goals, and I just couldn't do it because I couldn't see myself with the future. And I remember a teacher noticing that I hadn't filled out the worksheet, and she got mad at me in front of everyone. And I just burst into tears. And, she asked me what was wrong. And I told her that, my dad passed away a month ago. And, she expressed her condolences. But outside of that, I didn't really get any support from the school. I never went to go see a guidance counselor or speak to anyone about grief. I guess on my part, I didn't reach out to anyone. But I think that if someone had reached out to me and said, we have this, or, if someone really encouraged me to do it, I probably would have. But yeah, at that point, I was just overwhelmed with everything happening in my life. there were, of course, like a lot of kind people who helped us in the weeks after my dad died. We received food packages and vouchers from charity organizations like the Salvation Army, and the hospital staff even bought us a Christmas tree. But none of us received any support in terms of mental health. So, like I mentioned, I struggled a lot with my mental health during this time in my life. I was super overwhelmed and didn't know what to do. I knew that services like Headspace existed for young people, but I was too scared to contact them. I thought that doing so, the Australian government would find out and it would affect our stay in this country. It took so long for us to get here, and I didn't want to risk being deported because I was depressed. As a 16-year-old child, I saw myself and my family as a burden to the country and only temporarily allowed to stay here. And I didn't want to, you know, like give the government a reason to suspect that I would be any more of a burden. So yeah, I did pretty poorly in year 12. And when that year finished, I had no idea what to do with my life. As a temporary, resident, I wasn't eligible for HECS. So even though I did get a few offers from universities, I couldn't afford it. So I thought my only option was to work and to keep on volunteering like I did at school, but this time in the community. And volunteering in the community had an immensely positive impact on my life. I got involved in like various organizations like the Center for Multicultural Youth, or even just like my local council. And I guess I found out, there were so many other people who were like me and who have had similar struggles like me. And I guess it just felt less lonely and isolating to know that me and my family weren't alone. So I currently work within the youth sector and I love the work I do. Outside of work, I still volunteer quite a lot. And the reason why I decided to come here today and share my experiences is because I feel like there are just so many like migrant people who have had stories similar to mine, but our voices aren't part of the mainstream. And I feel extremely lucky and privileged to have made it through my first few years in this country. And I'm grateful to everyone who supported us. And yeah, I feel like my community has given me so many opportunities to develop my skills and self-confidence. And I want to do everything I can to continue making these opportunities available to other young people from culturally diverse backgrounds, especially those who are newly arrived. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that inspirational journey, Julia. It sounds like you still have a lot of hope and a lot of faith for what the future holds. So it's very reassuring. And thank you once again for sharing. Now we know that children and young people have the right to express their own views freely. They have the freedom of expression and they have the right to participate freely in their cultural life and in the arts. However, young cold people can often be considered an oppressed or marginalized group in society, as we've heard. And therefore, youth participation is an opportunity to give them greater control and more power in their lives and within their community. It can make services provided for young people more relevant, more safe, and even things like more cost effective. I think that positive youth development can take shape where young people's participation in adult structures prepares them to become active participants in their community and can assist in their personal and social development. With that being said, I would like to introduce Martha Metuisela, who was the 2017 winner of the Victorian Multicultural Commission Youth Award for her work to support Pacifica youth in Melbourne's western suburbs. Martha grew up with a Tongan background in Australia and has drawn on her experience to identify closely with the challenges faced by young people from diverse backgrounds. Her work has built the confidence in young people by highlighting their potential and inspiring them to participate in their local communities. At a collaborative level, Martha has co-founded Westside Pacifica, which is the youth advisory group that runs strengths-based programs, forums, and cultural competency training. More recently, she has been involved in projects for Pacifica and African youth, which aim to foster intercultural understanding and provide a forum to discuss common strengths and challenges in areas such as health, well-being, education, and employment. Now, with that being said, I'd like to invite Martha to reflect on the importance of cultural engagement and the relationship it has with youth participation. Over to you, Martha.
Thanks for that, Danny. Yeah, thanks, Danny. I've known Danny for a couple of years now, back when she was very young. So it's awesome to see, you know, our young people grow into massive platforms. So congratulations, Danny, on a great event. So before I start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I work and live, the Wurundjeri people, and recognise the continuing connection to land, water and community. I pay respects to elders past, present and emerging leaders. Kole ke hufaka ngai whatapu ko oswhai me muani, ka tā ke whaihalea o kutokanga ki he potunga e talabo. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Martha Metuisela. I'm an Australian-born Tongan woman, raised in the western suburbs of Melbourne. I'm a Pacifica Māori youth worker out in the Northwest. I have 6 years behind me of being active in the community and the youth sector. I'll be speaking on the topic of empowerment of youth participation and the importance of it. We'll just go on the next slide. Thanks. I just have a quote here by Franklin D. Roosevelt. This quote was given to me 4 years ago by one of my mentors. And the one thing he said to me was, "You may not understand it now, but soon you will." I pondered on this quote for a couple of years. And later, I truly understand the power of empowering our youths to be a part of decision-making, and especially with my profession. So I'll leave this here with you guys to ponder on. Next slide. Thank you. So I work under the LeMans Empower Pacifica project, which is under CMY, which is the Centre for Multicultural Youth. We are based out in the Southeast and as well as the Northwest. So a video that we're about to show you is based on a product of empowering our young people to basically facilitate a program and event. So this was a forum that was for our team out in the Northwest, and it was based on subjects such as education, mental health, crime prevention, youth justice, which were the main 4 impacts of our community. So bits and pieces of this was run by our youth ambassadors, which is our leadership team out in the Northwest, who is my purely go-to champions of young people. So we'll play a bit of the video just to kind of get an insight of the work that I do.
LeMans means to empower. It is important to empower the next generation to be able to take the lead and also guide the upcoming generation to lead the way as well. So we empower the next generation to be able to stand on their own 2 feet.
We're here at the LeMans Empower Māori and Pacifica Youth Forum. The theme of the forum is keeping connected to your cultural roots. And basically the forum is run and facilitated by Māori and Pacifica young people for Māori and Pacifica young people aged between 12 to 25. And it's basically a platform for them to voice their opinions about the certain issues that they face on a daily basis.
In our culture, Māori names would be for a forum like this would be, you know, hui, which is a gathering, or wānanga, which is like an intensive school of learning where teachings are passed down, young people are trained and given information, I guess, to fill up their kete, fill up their basket of knowledge. Some of the issues facing our young Pacifica people is, I guess, a lot of times people not understanding them from their cultural background, and some of the obstacles that they're facing in terms of living here in Australia and having their cultural values. Sometimes, you know, this clashes with the values of Australian society.
I think a lot of the issues circle around mental health, and the lack of education within this section of life, it does lead our youth to suicide, and a lot of the time that is what our youth face, and they are avoidable outcomes, but we just lack in the whole education section.
Spoken about our cultural ways on how they tend to drag us into dark pathways, and how it can also bring someone back. I guess there's a lot of voids that us islanders find, especially with the young youths, where since they can't talk to their parents, they tend to turn to their friends and get influenced in a good or bad way.
They basically live their life with having to split identities from day to day. You know, at home, they know the Pacifica values and they have responsibilities. When they come out of home, they feel more independent and they're not holding on to any responsibilities. So a lot of those kind of issues do come into play, and hence why we're here to kind of empower them and try to merge these two cultures together, and help them build their identity and know who they are as Pacifica young people, and be able to fit in within the rest of the cultures within their school environment, work environment.
I find forums like this are very important to our people for the next generation, because it's hardly ever that we are ever given the opportunity to address issues like this, and especially within the Pacifica community. We tend to sweep these kind of issues under the rug and not acknowledge that they exist when they really do. And I find that these will empower our people and build each other up, and make our culture more stronger, make our Pacifica a stronger community.
I'm just thankful for LeMans showing their presence today, showing that there's young adults, young youths out there that are willing to listen and willing to help out our society, especially our young Pacifica and Māori kids.
And it's awesome that we've opened the discussion, and now it's keeping it open, spreading the discussion, spreading the word, promoting it, making it known within not only the Pacifica community, but within our outside community as well.
The future looks bright for young Pacifica people. This is just the first step, having this youth forum, creating that platform for them to speak. I know deeply that us Pacifica and Māori people, we're very driven. When you give us that opportunity, we'll take it, but we'll take it 10 times further.
Cool. So the video that you guys all seen was based on a youth forum that was driven by young people, and it was catered for young people. And it was one of the first of its kind. We had a lot of young people coming in from the south, all the way from the rural areas, just to have a space to speak and voice about the changes they want to make. And it's a huge thing coming from a Pacifica background. As young people in our homes, we're told that our voices don't need to be heard. We're told to listen to our elders. So that mentality will be taken to the outside. So a lot of service providers or a lot of community workers in the sector will find it hard to kind of peel the layers off our young people. And it takes time, but it takes a key thing called creating safe spaces. And I found that goes alongside a lot of different cultures as well. The thing that we need to learn is the quality of creating safe spaces for our youths to speak, and for our youths to basically be on the table to drive and make decisions. We'll just go to the next slide. Thank you. Cool, so the importance of youth participation. I'm gonna talk to you guys a bit about my journey. My journey is long, but I kind of did it specifically in regards to youth participation. So I'm a product of a youth participation. At the age of 16, I started my journey by volunteering for a local youth organization. I was empowered by, at the time, a youth worker who gave me the opportunity to voice my thoughts on current issues and voice my opinions on solutions, by giving me the chance to sit at the table and take the lead without being told I was wrong, or being belittled because of my age, or being stereotyped because of the color of my skin. And that was something huge for me at that time. I started to drift away from volunteering when that youth worker resigned. It wasn't the same anymore. Years later, I finished high school, went to university and studied PR, but I would always reflect on the way I felt when I was 16 leading youth projects and the way I felt when that youth worker gave me that chance. A couple years down the track, I was helping out a family member who was doing an arts project for one of the local councils. Walking through that youth centre, looking at the youth flyers they had on the walls, I had that feeling again. I met with the community development officer there at the time. She walked up to me and said, I'm interested in your community. I see your Tongan and I want to do something. Let's make it happen. So I took the lead, took the leap of faith, made the sacrifices, and now I'm sitting here in front of you all, doing the things that I love and passing on that seed to the next generation. One thing I would kind of leave with you guys is the process of exchanging. The process of exchanging is really heavy in our culture. So with that, I talk about a seed. I open up the floor to young people. I plant the seed into them by giving them that chance. I always reflect back to that 16-year-old girl and that youth worker that really made me move. So what I basically, it's so important in regards to youth participation. You know, if we're empowering youth to engaging them in community activities, it allows them with guidance and it helps them gain skills. For me to be in a position where the roles have reversed, I am that youth worker and I'm speaking to the old 16-year-old. That feeling that as youth workers that we provide to the young people, it's something that you can never forget. And I think Danny will understand. It's such an empowering, powerful feeling that it would always be planted in your heart and you'll tend to always come back and never forget about it. And that's the powerful thing that youth workers, community sector workers actually have amongst young people, if we do it right. If we allow young people to sit at the table, talk about their issues, but not just giving them certain questions as in, what's going on in your community, how can I fix? But it's actions, it's not words and it's not textbook style. I think a lot of my work is majority of the time it's building rapport with the young people, stepping into their environment, understanding their upbringing, where they come from, finding similarities between the two cultures. Recently, I've been working alongside African communities, particularly South Sudanese. And the one thing I've asked them, because I don't know anything, and the one thing I did when I stepped into their environment was welcome me into your world. Let me know what I need to do culturally right to be able to connect with you on a different level. So when you provide that and you're creating the safe space, the respect is returned back to you. I'm always all about providing young people with opportunities to make the real change. When you bring young people to the table to sit with you equally and you create that equalness between the relationship between you as a youth worker as well as a young person, that equal opportunity gives you fresh eyes and you're keeping your projects current. The days go past, the older I get, I don't know anything much about social media. I was raised in the 90s. All I had back then was Bevo. And when young people are, coming to me with all these different things, I let them drive it. But then I also challenge them and say, but if this happens, what about this? Or vice versa. And that's what I mean about keeping connected with young people, letting them sit on your tables, creating that equal environment. And just, creating safe spaces, I would say. So in the importance of your participation, and empowering them creates so much opportunity. Like I say, I'm a product of it. I'm a product of bumping into an amazing youth worker who really changed my life. And now what I do is basically what I love. And the feeling that that youth worker has given me, I hope I give it to the next generation. We'll just go on the next slide, please. And that pretty much leads to the success stories. As you see, I'm in a picture of a group of young women who this was probably taken a couple of years ago, who are now working in different service providers. They're working in different organizations. They're taking the lead they're making powerful moves within the community sector. Each of them are either leaders of their community, on youth advisory boards, leading up their way, kind of making a presence and an appearance as a Pacifica young woman. I would say the opportunities of when you get the empowering and youth participation right, the power of word of mouth is crazy. I can now sit here and say, I don't go looking for the young people come to me. And that's how I know I've did my job right. I've created that safe space. I've created that safe pathway that young people just flood my email saying, I've got this idea for a project and I think it's going to be great. Can I come and see you? Or I'll come into your office and they'll bring a group of people and say, let's get to work. So right now, I'm blessed to sit in a space where I don't have to write project briefs. They come to me and it comes purely from the young people's voices. I sit there and support them and provide some sort of pathways and opportunities for them to grow and move with this, and move further, pretty much. I'll just go to the next slide, which I'll talk about, which is an example of working with other cultures. So this project here was a project that I did in 2017. And it was a project that was a collaborative of different organizations. And it was called Stir It Up. That was basically done in Brimbank, so the local council of Brimbank. And they pretty much said, Martha, we would love for you to take the lead, but it's going to have to involve African communities. And I said, look, I know it's new, but I'm ready to. So that was a process of about, I would say, 6 months. And it was, and like I said, it was the process of me getting to know that culture first, not me assuming that culture based on what I know or what I've read about, or, you know, I have a friend who is South Sudanese. It wasn't me being someone who came from assumptions. I sat those young people at the table and I said, can you cook me your traditional foods? How do you say hello in your language? How many countries are there in Africa? Please pick me up if I'm saying something wrong in terms of your culture. And we designed this project here, which was based on the Last Supper. And it was kind of mixed with culture, modern day, as well as speaking truth. So this picture basically talks about how we can all sit at the table equally, no matter the color of our skin, the color of our hair, our backgrounds, and we all share similarities. So what we did in this project is that we fleshed out, it was all young people. And the one thing I said, what's one thing we find common with our cultures? And they said fashion, religion, and we got into deep conversations such as stereotypes. You know, I relate so much to Mohamed's story about being put into ESL. I was put into ESL for 3 years as well. And that was just based on assumptions. That was based on, you know, my mum being a non-English speaker, and the way she filled out my forms, they assumed that I couldn't speak English. So I like to, so that's kind of came out of that as well. So this is a product of two cultures coming together, building something based on similarities. And now that exhibition, there was different other photos as well, but this is the main one, which is called the Women Empowerment one. So 50 Shades of Brown, The Last Supper. So this exhibition has moved around Melbourne, and now these young women get paid to put their photos out. They have their own business. It gets featured around different councils. It's going to the Immigration Museum to have an expo there. So I like to build projects as well as give it back to the young people and say, what do you want to do with this? It can go wherever you want it to go, because this is yours. This came out of your own thoughts. This is your voices that is on this. And this is a visual of what our generation is moving into. So these young women here, get to move with these photos, and they get to represent it around Melbourne, wherever they like. So, and I'm 100% with Mohamed about visuals and creating stories and telling stories. So a lot of the projects that I do with young people is very visual based, a lot of videos, a lot of photos, something tangible and something that can create future pathways for them to continue on. But yeah, that's a bit about youth participation empowering. But yeah, thank you all for listening. I hope that kind of made sense.
Thanks so much for sharing, Martha. Like she said, we go way back, and we both stem from being a participant in a lot of community engagement. So it is quite important. So thank you for sharing, Martha. I'd like to thank all the speakers who've taken the time to share and address the issues that they have faced identifying as a cull young person within their community sector. I also think it's quite inspiring to see how we rise above the challenges and we continue to work to support future generations. If these guys can do it, we can all do it, I believe. I'd also like to thank my supervisor, Georgette, and our CEO of the centre, Deb, for the constant support and encouragement to be able to run this event for you guys today. It means the world to me to be able to represent something that's really, really important for our sector. I would now like to also welcome Reggie Chang to join a panel discussion that I will open up. Reggie Chang is my colleague, who is another youth support facilitator from the Centre for Excellence. Reggie is a queer, non-binary person of colour and comes from a lived experience of out-of-home care, mental health, and being LGBTIQA+. Reggie is passionate in advocacy, studies film, and spends their time playing video games and listening to music. I would now like to open questions to the floor. Feel free to use your microphone or camera or pop them in the chat function. There are quite a few here, so I guess I'll start them off. So Malia asked the first question for Mohamed. What has motivated you to keep going even when you face many challenges with racism in school, in employment, and in everyday life?
That's a very good question. I think I would have to put it on two things, right? One was the support that I got, and two was the results I was seeing because of my actions. So the first, and I like how Martha had said this before, and just to reiterate on what she said. So for myself, I feel like I'm a product of my environment, right? And that means all the people that helped me along the way, especially when I was when I had my stutter. If it had not been for my year 9, year 10 English teacher, that I guess identified that, okay, I'm very good at English, and when I saw the speech therapy for me, like I would not have done many of the things that I've done today. I wouldn't even be able to do this panel today. I feel like seeing just the support that I got from her and seeing the effect that had on me, I guess inspires me right now to have that same effect on other people, right? And also, once I guess like young people, right, take opportunity and then they see the results of the actions, I think it's a motivation booster, because I feel like for a very long time, I guess I didn't have much to lose. And that's when I guess you start getting the doubt. That's when I guess like it's just easier just to give up. Okay, if everyone's perceiving me as being this way, then why don't I just, you know, what's my impetus to, I guess, like change? So yeah, I just like, that's why like now, so I just start a social enterprise called Endeavour Youth Australia, and mainly what we do is touch on cultural awareness at schools, and yeah, it's all about just changing the narrative one step at a time. I hope that answers your question.
Awesome, thanks for that. I've got a second question here, and I guess this can go for anyone. What would you share with our young people for them to be proud of their heritage and their cultural ties?
I think that's a big one. Personally, I grew up in Australia. I was born in Australia. And for a big significant chunk of my life, I kind of ignored my own culture, my Chinese Cambodian culture. And for a long time, because I was raised around white kids, that I kind of neglected acknowledging my culture for what it was. And the biggest lesson I've learned over the last few years is that I should reconnect with that culture when you can, because connecting with that culture can bring out a lot of insights into your own life about the way you behave, the way you're brought up, and the way you see things, which gives, I guess, some kind of importance onto like your culture within itself. A lot of my friends still today, they tell me that I'm very whitewashed, and whitewashed being like, there's a typical term for people like me. They're called bananas. So it's yellow on the outside but white on the inside, and it's a slang meaning, but basically I've lived my whole life being seen as a white person for what it is, but I've never really acknowledged my culture for what it was. And I think the biggest advice I can give to any young person from any diverse culture is to learn about your culture, explore it, live it, try to take the most out of it. Obviously you'll have a different upbringing to most kids from those migrant cultures in itself. So for example, a child growing up in Cambodia, for example, would live a very different life to what I'm living now. So you've just got to acknowledge the importance of the different intercultural generations within your own life and learn from it, for what I can recommend.
Yeah, I think I'll jump in there. 100% agree with Reggie. I had a growing up just neglecting my own culture, didn't want to be about it because I never seen where we could fit into the society. It was either you were a minority, or you were white, basically. You were fitting into the Western world. So, and that I really struggled with finding my identity through that process, and it led to a lot of mental health issues, anxiety, depression, and that's what a lot of our young people are finding hard with as well, because social media tells you different. So I think one thing I definitely share with our young people in terms of expressing their culture and heritage is that if you have culture in you, that's something unique. That's something you hold and you take with you. And that's something that you should be privileged about. And that's something that makes you different to everybody else. And it takes the journey of me having to go back to my culture and find that is why I'm here. It's why I stand out in the crowd. And it's why I'm able just to move in places that I thought I could never move. And also, yeah, I think young people are just say it's draining to be someone that you're not and just be real with yourself. I tell my kids, I'm like, you're Tongan and you can't run away from that. As much as you try to fit into society, it would never help you. So yeah, just be unique and be you and express your culture. You're allowed to. So that's what I'll share young people.
Amazing, Martha. Thank you for that. Another question for you, Martha. For everyone really, what can organisations do to support young people, particularly Pacifica young people?
Yeah, I always have this question, and like I say, look, I'll take you into my environment. I'll bring you to my people. It's you can't read about other people's culture, you can't study it, but you have to be amongst it. I can provide you with so many competency trainings about my culture, but you won't know unless you walked with me along the journey. So that's what I'll say to the organizations out there. I'm sure Danny will give you guys my email. I'm happy to have chats with you and support you if you are supporting our young people. I'm definitely here. But yeah, you can't read about our culture. I would say that it's about stepping in and walking with us along the journey.
Awesome, thank you. I also have another question here. What community group or organisation would you recommend for someone working in government that is looking to get more experience with CULD youth? Now, for reference, this person identifies as a CULD queer young person.
One thing I could recommend, if you are working for any of the big state organizations like DFFH or DHHS, or any, because I used to work for DHHS before it became DFFH, there was a youth action group called YoungGov. You might have to look it up within the internal like network through the government network, but there was a this young organization which empowered young people to get better working conditions, all that kind of stuff. If you just look up the word YoungGov within the internal like government systems, it should come up. But that's pretty much all I can offer. Yeah, I didn't know if there was any specifically called young thing, but I knew there was a young persons group with a lot of culturally and linguistically diverse people in it.
And I'm assuming by recommend you mean like a place to work for, maybe volunteer for. So like the three of us, Martha, Mohamed, and I volunteer with the Center for Multicultural Youth. And Martha could probably speak a little more about like what CMY does, because she works for CMY, but it's a really good organization that's like personally helped me a lot with like connecting with other young people who are also culturally and linguistically diverse, and getting involved in like doing things for our community and feeling empowered to do so.
Great, thanks for that. I would like to know myself, what would you say would be the most difficult part of starting a change or initiative? And do you think it is more difficult as a young person? What are some of your recommendations so that we can improve this process of implementing change?
Let me start. Yeah. I think in particular with starting an initiative, it's always hard because you don't know the reception you're going to get, the reactions, and you might not know what support is out there for you to do well. So I feel like the important thing is having a vision. And so for me in particular, I always wanted to, I guess, like make a difference, right? Because obviously I saw that there was a problem and I wanted to be a part of the change. But the hardest thing for me is that I didn't see any opportunities around me to do that. And I feel like a lot of young people want to be put in that position, but there's just a lack of opportunity. Because I felt like a lot of the times that there were programs, there were initiatives at school, I was never told because there was an assumption that, you know, like I wouldn't even be interested. So I feel like with the information that's going out there in terms of like what programs are available, what initiatives are out there, I guess it should be more like, it shouldn't just be tailored to, I guess, a specific group. I guess if it's for young people, then open it for all young people. So yeah, because I feel like there was only certain times where a teacher would come like, hey, Mohamed, there's this. And every time I was approached about a program, opportunity, I went for it and I entered. But the ones that I didn't know about, like, yeah, because being young, I didn't know that there was CMY out there. I didn't know there was all these organizations out there. I guess that's why I think it's very important to give opportunities to young people while they're at high school. I guess, yeah, they're there 8 hours a day and they're more, I guess, they have more access to information. So I feel like with opportunities, they should be targeted in high schools, because a lot of people are looking for opportunity, but they just can't find it.
Would anyone else like to share a bit of insight on that question?
Yeah, I think based on Mohamed's one, we definitely in high schools, one of the things that we do is we work in high schools and do programs, and I don't see much youth services flyers in the wellbeing teams or anything. So these, you know, our young people spend 8 hours in schools. They do little projects within their schools, but how can the youth sector implement that? How can we use the voices of those students who don't normally walk past a community centre or a hub or want or feel comfortable in attending an office, get involved? So I would recommend that based on what Mohamed said.
And I really like that that you mentioned how there isn't like a huge youth service presence in schools, Martha. So, you know, like working for a youth service myself, I've reached out to schools before and tried to get like flyers promoted or like programs promoted to students, and that wouldn't really happen for, I guess, like reasons like there just being too much already happening at the school, or maybe, you know, it's not, I guess, like identified like as a priority thing. So I feel like based even on my own personal experience, I didn't know like that organizations like CMY existed until after I graduated high school and started to look for those like organizations myself. So yeah, I think definitely like there needs to be a lot more done with schools so that students know like what exists out there in the community as well. And yeah, there was actually that question earlier from Malia that I wanted to answer. If it's all right, if we can kind of like backtrack a little bit. What would you share with our young people to be proud of their heritage and their cultural ties? I just wanted to say, like, when I talk to people about culture, like the message I want to get across is that your experience of your culture is valid and it's your own, and you shouldn't let anyone else tell you, you know, what your culture is or what it means. Because I feel like growing up, you know, as a diverse person, people are gonna like make assumptions about you, like Mohamed mentioned. But those assumptions are their assumptions, and you know the truth. You know who you are, basically.
I've got a couple questions that I would like to ask. For anyone that's listening, feel free to add any questions that you have in the Q&A function. I just would like to know what a culturally safe and culturally aware organization for CALD young people looks like to you guys. Thinking back to when you were 15 and 16-year-old young people, what sort of, I guess, structures or procedures would you have liked to see or have available looking back now?
I think the biggest one for me personally was because I was in our home care, like foster care. The biggest thing that I could have asked for was being put in a foster home that was the identical, not identical, but close to my cultural heritage as possible. And my first experience was, my first foster home was a Malaysian family in Glen Waverley. And they were, we all ate at the dinner table. We had rice, as a meal. And then we'd have like, condiments like, stir-fried vegetables or like fried eggs, and we'd all come together and we'd eat that together. I think that was the biggest significant factor in reaffirming my cultural identity without it being too much of a it wasn't like they put me into a white home that ate at the couch, I mean? I needed that kind of stabilization figure of eating at the dinner table as a family compared to what traditional other families may have ate. And I think I really felt appreciated for that. And that was something that I really was enjoyed for being in our home care, having that experience, which I know that a lot of young people may not have had.
Would anyone else like to share in terms of what a culturally safe organization will need to consider or have?
Yep, I'll touch on that quick. So I guess it all comes down to, in my opinion, is there training in place for staff in terms of cultural awarenesses, I guess understanding the weight of one's word, I guess discussing and addressing implicit biases, and I guess a whole range of things, because it's not easy to talk about, I guess, racism and discrimination, it's never been easy. And that's one thing that I realized growing up, is that every time that I wanted to address it, because I didn't know how to articulate myself, people got defensive, and say in particular, some of my teachers or the school, when I wanted to address it as a systemic issue in the school, I was kicked out of class, you know, at times I was suspended for being inconsiderate, you know. So I feel like at the foundation, it needs to be addressed, and things need to be put in place, I guess, because it's not, the important thing is not, if the situation, I guess, like is racist or not, it's that as a young person being like 10, 11, 12 years old, I think it is, you know, or I believe it is. I experience that, you know, that situation. I'm always going to believe that if it's not addressed, you know, because it can be a misunderstanding, right? It could be just me, okay, experiencing a lot of things outside of school, experiencing a lot of things, let's just say from one particular teacher, and me lashing out on the others, you know. But if it's never addressed and things aren't put in place for change, then we're going to get the same of old.
I just want everyone to have a think about when it comes to representing CALD young people, it's important that we all understand they are marginalized and underrepresented. But when they come to access our services, we don't want to tokenize them. How can we best approach this type of challenge?
I have an experience of being tokenized. I've been put into positions where where my community was red hot with government and funding was coming through, and they needed a poster girl. I've been in those positions, and I've learnt from it, and I always teach the young people the differences between actual people that want you to do meaningful work or someone that just wants you to be a poster girl. So with that, it's, what I found is that a lot of young people, they know what's fake and what's genuine off the back of your body language, off the back of the way you look at them. They will know whether you're genuine or not. And I think it's based on the previous question that you said, one thing that got me attached to that particular youth worker at the age of 16 was her body language. She was different to the other youth workers. She made the effort to go and learn a greeting from my culture. So I think with that it's a lot of, there are a few sectors out there that I can see there's a lot of tokenistic things happening with young people, especially from CALD communities. And one thing that we need to kind of focus on and really concentrate on is how can we be genuine and actually get these young people and provide them opportunities without just making them take photos for their poster? How can we get their voices heard but not just plastered all over our social medias? How can we create projects that has their voices coming out rather than documented into an evaluation that gets fed up to something that it's not going to reach a lot of young people? How can we be really authentic with our work? That, these voices are heard on different sorts of platforms, and a movement continues, and our young people from CALD communities are being heard on different types of levels. So I think moving into 2021, like the game has changed for youth work. We need to move on different types of platforms. Young people need to be heard on different levels. But yeah, I think that's kind of, tokenistic was done back in the 90s, I would say. So right now, there's a lot of our young people are standing up, they're voicing, and it's powerful. And we need to, as professionals in the sector, we need to kind of move in the times and move with young people and how they want to move. So definitely get the young people to lead how they want their voices to be heard, rather than how can we make your voice to be heard? Give it to the young people. How do you want your voices to be heard? Ask them that question.
Amazing. That's really useful insight. Thank you for that, Martha. We've got a question here. They are interested to hear your guys' thoughts on the model minority myth, which essentially is where there's unrealistic expectations placed on CALD young people. I know you guys have shared your experiences with the expectations or the assumptions that you guys have experienced. So if anyone wants to share a bit about what they think.
I would try and tackle that question. I'm reading it, and it's a difficult question. But if I was to speak on that, I'll say I felt like I did have a lot of expectations put on me, but it was only when I guess I started being in positions, right? So when I was school captain, or when I was in debating, and when I was on for council, that's when I felt like I had the weight of like my whole community on my shoulders, right? And I feel like, because at the beginning, there's the barrier of, okay, trying to get in, right? So if we go back to the previous question about tokenism and being underrepresented and stuff, I think it's important. Equal opportunity is important, right? And I feel like, so for instance, and I keep using this example because it's a good one, with when I wanted to get into leadership, right? So you could have just been, okay, I applied, I went to meet, I put up the application, and then decide from there. But before that step, there was barriers there. There was the assumptions and the preconceived ideas that the leadership officer had about young people, about young people from cult backgrounds, you know what I mean? So I feel like those types of assumptions, those type of thing, are the ones that are, I guess, that are being the barriers to success, because I feel like if there was a equal playing field, I guess, and that equal opportunity, take away assumptions, take away the thing, and just give the young person a choice, either to do well or not. And I feel like we'll see better results in that. But to go back to the current question, so once I got in, okay, then it became that, okay, now I feel like when I speak or when I act, I'm doing on behalf of my whole community. Because I feel like, especially as a young Black male, when I'm in the streets, I feel like I have to like smile all the time, okay? And I always have to like look, I guess, friendlier than I am. And I guess because I feel like when people look at me, they're gonna, I guess that's gonna how they're gonna form their ideas of my community. So I guess so with that, I feel like that expectation is there, and it's always, I guess, in the back of my mind. But yeah.
And to add to that, Mohamed, I feel like being a minority is just, our existence is a political thing, and I wish it wasn't. And it is like something that I guess like weighs heavily on my mind, and I'm sure that it is something that a lot of other diverse young people think about, because it's like whatever we do, it's like a representation of our culture, but I am an individual as well, and what I do is because I am who I am. My culture is a part of me, and it's not the only thing that I guess it's not my only thing. I'm not just a representation. So yeah, I think it is very harmful. I do remember when we first came to Australia that my mom had this conversation with me where she said, you're gonna have to work harder than everyone, because like the odds are going to be stacked against you, and you have to make sure that you have to impress basically the white people so that we can stay in this country, and they'll see our like worth. And it's disheartening to see that it's kind of been internalized by a lot of migrants, especially like older migrants. I think my mom still kind of feels that way, but yeah, it's very harmful. And yeah.
I also just want to add to that, Julia, there's another question here for you. They would like to know how the idea of a migrant burden sits with you now. Do you feel like you still owe something to the country, this sort of problematic dynamic? How do you feel about it now?
So I was lucky enough to get permanent residency in 2019, I think. And even at that point, I was still struggling with like the feeling of being a migrant burden. Like I was working for council and I was doing all this volunteer work for the community, but inside I kind of felt that, I wasn't really part of this community because my status in this country was only temporary. But yeah, like getting that, I guess like permanent visa did help quite a lot. And really that like I guess like that burden kind of like lifted when I got that visa, to be honest. It kind of stayed with me for like a really long time, even though, like I mentioned, I was already, you know, doing work for the community. And I see that there's another question that asks if I still feel like I owe something to the country. I think I still kind of feel like I owe something to my community, but for different reasons. So when I first came here, it would have been, you know, to prove that I deserve to be in this country and, you know, you shouldn't kick me out. But now it's more like my community has done so much for me and I'm so connected to these people and I want to see other young people do well. So like that's kind of like, you know, that's kind of like why I feel like I still owe something to the community. The reason has kind of like shifted into something more positive. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we can all agree that being a product of the amount of experience that you've all shared, I think that drives the ultimate passion to see change for our future generations. So I definitely agree with you there, Julia. There's one final question here that I'll share with you guys. So Leah has said that there's clearly a generation gap, whether it's between families, between services, between local council. How can we maintain relationships between young people and their parents when these sort of issues are present?
Do you want to start? Or does anyone else want to go?
I was just gonna say that because I'm so detached from my own family, that I only raise surface level issues with them, and I kind of keep everything at a peace. And I think it's very much an ingrained Asian culture thing, where you only talk about the like what happened during your week or your day, but never really talking about the like high level like intergenerational gap that kind of divides us. But that's just my experience as a Asian person living in Australia.
I like really relate with that, Reggie, as well. Like, especially when it comes to mental health, me and my parents are just like in completely different, I guess, levels of understanding of it. In my culture, it's seen as a taboo. You know, if you were seeing a therapist, you'd be seen as a crazy person. And I think that mindset came with my parents when they came to Australia, which you know, is a country which I feel like is more accepting of mental health, even though there are still some issues. And yeah, it's kind of like led me to not talk about that sort of thing with my parents, because in my culture, it's kind of like the elders who know everything and you're not meant to like question what they say. So my mom's opinions in mental health would kind of be law and I can't challenge that. And even though I do try, it's a process. But yeah, it definitely exists and I don't really have an answer for how we can fix that.
No, I definitely agree with Julia in terms of the mental health. It's a taboo thing, especially majority of the Pacifica and Māori communities are very spiritual, are very religious. So mental health is kind of looked at as it's a devil's play. You know, my child is not going crazy mentally, and that's something that does not exist in our household. And that still plays like the whole generational gap between our parents and the young people. Hence why I like to cater my work about empowering with peer-to-peer mentorship. If we can't get through to our parents, we have that, well, I'll say my generation, the late 20s to the 30s, the ones that were the first generation migrants to live in Australia, who understand the two worlds and that can sit to support the young people in terms of understanding, the past trauma of our parents coming from dawn raids, migrating to Australia, not knowing if they're safe living here or not. And then that's been passed down as a cycle to their children. And it's not our parents' fault. It's not our elders' fault. It's just how the society was running back in those days. And it's how it's reflected back on us. And then now we're coming into this world where it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to seek help for mental health issues. It's okay to to express yourself, you know, and voice that you're going through something. So I think that's a really sticky one. You know, I think it's going to take a long time for it to get fixed. But if, you know, if this generation doesn't fix it now, then that cycle will continue. So if we don't start creating that awareness to the young people to create that, yes, it's okay to go through what you're going through. We have services and help, and we'll step in there to support you, as well as, you know, be respected by your parents as well and understand where your parents are coming from. But if we don't step in and start making that change, that cycle will continue for generations.
And just to touch on what Martha was saying, I really liked what she said about like the gap in terms of tackling mental health within the younger generation and the older community. Because I feel like from my experience and the experience of those in my community, like my parents and the oldest, I guess they came from, you know, like they had a tough time back home, right? So they said they came from a war-torn country, and I guess when they come to Australia, and I feel like this is the same thing that I've been getting from my parents and stuff, is that they feel so, I guess, like, because they've experienced how back home was, you know what I mean, and all the hardship that they went through, then how they perceive our issues through their lens is very minimal, you know what I mean? And I guess, like, because they see, I guess, such a large gap, yeah, between what they look at our, I guess, like, you know, because they came from war, they came from, I guess, you know, not knowing where to sleep and all that, and I guess to like our issues, and what they haven't, I guess, come to terms that, okay, we live in a different society now, and I guess there are different barriers to success. There are different things that are acceptable or not acceptable, and I guess that's why I don't see a lot of the older community, especially my parents and stuff, like questioning things, right? Like my mom thinks that you go to school and the school has your best interests at heart, right? Like, you go to school and you gotta learn. There's nothing else that needs to be done. Australia will take care of you. The police, they're good. They'll always be good. They'll always take care of you. Government is always. So I feel like those are the type of perceptions and stuff that need to be addressed within the older community, I guess, in order to tackle like the mental health side of things. But I guess first is to get them to, I guess, understand the current issues and to understand, okay, there's, you know, it's not back home. And yeah, I guess as soon as they start understanding the issues and start understanding the, I guess, like the political arena, I guess that's when they can, I guess, start addressing those concerns. If that makes sense.
I would just like to thank all the panelists once again for sharing their insights today. I think we can take away at least a few inspirational and useful points back to our respective organisations. And today's session can definitely spark further innovative conversation and implementation. As a young person myself, I resonated with many of the experiences our panelists have shared. I do think it is important to recognise the work that is being done thus far, but we must also increase support and initiative for our future generations of young people, particularly for those who are culturally and linguistically diverse. The conversations that have taken place today highlight the issues that many CALD young people face, but it has been hopeful to see that the amazing work that's already being done within these young people's lives and within organisations such as CMY. Therefore, if you take one piece of information from today's session, I hope that it is to continually aim to increase support and access to services for young people whilst ensuring cultural sensitivity and safety. I'd like to thank you all for tuning in and staying engaged throughout the session. I know 2 hours is a lot to ask, so I do thank you all. A copy of the slides will be available to be sent out shortly, and feel free to pass on any contact information if you'd like to get in contact with the panelists or with myself after the session. If there are any questions that you haven't gotten a chance to ask or to have answered, please feel free to email me. Sometimes some of our best reflections and thoughts occur way beyond the moment. In closing, there are a few resources that I've sourced if you guys are interested. There's just a few articles that CMY have actually produced just around sort of the digital age and how we can increase engagement for young people of migrant and refugee backgrounds. There's also some conversational pieces and some research pieces as well. So feel free to take note of those. Have a look at CMY's website. There's full of useful resources there. I think it's safe to say that we finished up nice and early. I hope you all have a fruitful remainder of the day and continue to support and enrich the lives of our young people. And don't forget, as Jane Goodall has said, when young people are informed and empowered, they realise what they can do truly can make a difference, and that can indeed change the world. So thank you everyone for tuning in.